Well, think we can start to talk about your reading for today then. I'm going to record all our sessions going forward, including this class right now, and I will post it on our Canvas site if you want to ever reference it, or if you have nothing to watch on a Friday night, hell, pull up class, sit back, fall asleep immediately, whatever. But I've been making a practice of recording classes since we've been on Zoom, and some students seem to appreciate it. So it's easy enough for me to do. So I might as well do it. Okay. Today we're going to talk about Max. Well, the German is Weber, but I guess we should just call him Weber, Max Weber, because then that's easier for all of us to understand. I took 2 years of German in college, so I still like to do the German pronunciation once in a while, even if it's not necessary. Any case, for today I had you read a section of a book by Max Weber, his most famous work, The Spirit, what's it called again? The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. I don't really know much about Max Weber, to be honest with you. He's considered one of the forefathers or one of the founders of the field of sociology. And sociology being the study of societies, the organizing ideas, the organizing principles of societies, the motivating principles. So I guess we could see how his interest in sociology led him to the writings that you read for today in particular. He lives like 1860 to 1920 in Germany, and he writes this book in 1905. I think we should probably, we'll have to discuss, who he's responding to. And in many ways, this is intended to be a response to Marx. Although from someone who's sympathetic, as we'll see. He's sympathetic to the Marxist critique of capitalism, but it's an alternate explanation for the origins of capitalism. So I don't know, once upon a time, it was pretty much a requirement everybody read the Communist Manifesto. Show of hands, how many have read the Communist Manifesto? Wow. Okay. Well, then I'm going to have to talk about it. How many of you here have read about Marxism or studied it a little bit? Okay. Air, do you want to say something? Or are you just raising your hand?
I was just raising my hand. I'm sorry.
Rockin', do it. That's awesome. Before your time, like 3 years ago, we had a class at MICA required for first year called Critical Inquiry. And students in that class always covered, invariably, they would have some Freud and some Marx in there. It was pretty much guaranteed. And now that class has been redone, that is no longer a guarantee. I guess there's other reasons. I don't know. What do you all have to say for yourselves? Why haven't you read Marxism? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Anybody want to blame their high school?
I'll blame my high school.
Oh, why don't we use the hand raising function? It's under reactions. That way I can call on you in order. All right, Evan, you have the floor.
I mean, I was just going to say that, I haven't read the Communist Manifesto because it was a long time ago, but I have read on Marxism and communism. So I feel like I know, but I just haven't read the actual source material.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I've never read the manifesto itself, but pretty early in high school, we read the Animal Farm and some other works like it. So it seems like we've kind
Oh,
of gone
right.
about it in a roundabout way.
Good. Excellent. Everybody reads Animal Farm. Yeah. My kid, my high schooler just finished it. I have 4 kids, and every single one of them had to read Animal Farm sophomore year. So I am sick of Animal Farm. I have to answer their questions. I'm tired of it. Anybody else? You think your peers, your generation are very knowledgeable about Marxism? Is Animal Farm the extent of it? Sean.
I don't think we learn about it in school, but I think a lot of people in our generation are interested in learning about it on their own. And so they seek out their own sort of sources on Marxism.
Good.
Sorry, I don't have the raise hand function,
Oh,
but
it's under reactions.
I think my Zoom is outdated. I need to
No
update.
worries.
But I think we, in general, our generation, and I guess maybe speaking more for Gen Z, because I think I know more about them, I think people hear the theory spoken about a lot. So I think to that extent, I don't know if they feel the need to read it for themselves. But then I think that also means that sometimes people are just kind of hearing things through the grapevine. And so maybe they have a misinterpretation of like what Marx actually said or what other original Marxist thinkers originally said. But I think in general, people are more knowledgeable than we would give them credit for.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm a different generation from you guys, obviously. I'm like 30 years older. When I grew up in the 80s, we had, you could talk to your parents about this. It was a different sensibility about communism. There were some, there were communist regimes that at least nominally were communist that were, dominated half the globe. Nowadays, there are many fewer of those communist regimes. China is probably the biggest representative of a communist regime, but as we know, it is more of a state capitalist regime than it is any recognizable communist regime. It's a very strange state of affairs, what's happened with China. When I was your age, though, Russia, of course, the Soviet Union was, and it was a very, that was in the United States, it was cast as like a scary opponent as well, So there was great ambivalence about Marxism in the 1980s in America. People read about it. Some people, I think a lot of people read about it, but I think a lot of people, because I remember reading Animal Farm in middle school too, in high school too. But I don't know, I wonder if there is less attention to it, if that has anything to do with the fact that, its geopolitical presence is so diminished. I don't know. One thing I will say is, you do hear in the American political landscape today, you do hear a lot of people worried about socialism, right? And we'll get into that throughout this class. A lot of the fears about socialism are very curious because there seems to be a lot of variation or uncertainty as to what socialism is from those who are complaining about it. But anyway, why don't I just start here? What do you know about Marxism? Go for it, Sean.
I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to
You're
say
not
that
going to go out on a limb. Y'all read Animal Farm. So
I'm going to say that Marxism was developed by Karl Marx.
Okay.
And was a precursor to a lot of the socialist and communist ideas that we have today.
Wait, okay. the point that many of you made is that, you know, there's some kind of like cultural familiarity with it, even if we haven't cracked open the Communist Manifesto. So I think you guys probably already do know quite a bit about Marxism. So let's tease that out. Chloe, go for it.
My like base level understanding is that it's the idea that basic needs should be taken care of for all people by the state.
Good. Okay. Teresa, were you going to say something?
Sorry, I just accidentally clicked on the button.
Okay, no worries. Okay. Yes, Rachel.
So I don't know a lot about it, but words that come to mind are proletariat rising up against the bourgeoisie.
And why would they rise up against the bourgeoisie?
Because the bourgeoisie keeps the proletariat oppressed.
Good. Let's see here, Daniel.
Isn't a
Now we're
lot of
getting
it?
somewhere. This is good.
Isn't a lot of it about evening out inequalities in the sense that there's a given amount of productivity in a country that's determined by its workforce, and instead of having people control the workforce and extract wealth from it, the workforce kind of keeps the wealth amongst itself in a kind of a flatter sense. Speaking vaguely here, not like with any real definitions.
So instead of the capitalists hogging the capital, it will be more widely possessed.
Yeah, like the value of your work is simultaneously greater, but not more than anyone else's work.
Gotcha. All right, Sean.
Yeah, just to jump off that, Marxism is very much concerned with the exploitation of labor and the extracting of value from the proletariat's labor.
Awesome. Good. So he writes this. Oh, Jesse.
I just had a quick point. I also didn't learn much about Marxism, but I think I remember something about like who controls the means of production, where Marx was responding to the bourgeoisie controlling it and wanted the people / the proletariat to be able to control it and thus implement all of the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of sharing the wealth.
Good. Yeah, that's a good Marxist term there, the means of production. Get familiar with that term. And Jesse raises an excellent point. This is actually the most basic definition of Marxism / communism is basically this, is that the means of production are owned in common. In capitalism, the means of production are owned by private entities. So another way to put it in communism is that the means of production, there is a shared ownership, if you will, which there are many criticisms of how that turns out. I'm just going over the main definitions here for you. Air.
I just wanted to like express that I don't know a lot about Marxism either, but I know that there was like a clear distinction between like the private property versus like that means of production. There was like a distinction. Like when in criticism of Marxism and like socialism and stuff, there's always been like this like loss of individuality, loss of which is something that's clearly stated, but I just know that it's a thing. I wanted to.
No, it's good.
It just came to mind.
Very interesting point, Air. We seem to be more familiar with the criticisms of Marxism and communism, which I'm not sure where that's coming from. I have my theories, but that's interesting. Good. Okay, well, let me push on this a little bit. If so many of you have read Animal Farm, what do y'all remember? What was the point? George Orwell, Animal Farm, for those of you who don't know. Okay, we got a taker. Sean.
So my take, or from what I remember, it was sort of in the early chapters, the ideas expressed by like the Marx stand-in character were sort of presented as very noble and idealized, but the sort of over the course of the book, they become corrupted. And so I think it was sort of it was this idea that it was a theoretically good practice, but it didn't work in a practical setting.
Awesome. Okay, Jesse.
Sorry, my unmute spacebar thing doesn't work sometimes.
Okay.
I read Animal Farm in 7th grade, so it's been a really long time. But what I do remember is that all the animals were upset that they weren't getting equal treatment. And so some animals decided, we're going to be the ones to step up and demand equal treatment for all the other animals. But then what they ended up doing was deciding that they deserved more equal treatment than the rest of them. And so, yeah, they came up with that rule of some are more equal than others. And so they ended up getting special treatment and things and actually creating their own delineation under equality, which doesn't make any sense.
Right. That was the saying I remember from Animal Farm. All animals are equal. And it is on an animal farm. For those of you who don't know, the two main characters are those pigs, right? Napoleon, and who's the other one?
Snowball, I think.
Snowball. Okay. What a name. Anyway, right. And they basically try to create a utopian communist state, and it quickly devolves. And Orwell, I don't really know much about him, but he was not like a capitalist factory owner. He was, I think he had socialist sympathies. Whatever. Good. Well, so, okay. These are, like I said, these are all rather the criticisms of Marxism that we know quite well. But let me zero in on one thing in particular that will help us, give us a good launching point into Max Weber. Back to this idea about the means of production. I wonder if anybody know, and so in capitalism, the means of production are owned privately. In communism, the means of production are owned in common. I wonder if anybody knows what that term means, the means of production. What is that referring to? What all does it include? Yes, sir.
So like the factories and the farms, the infrastructure that produces goods.
There you go. Jesse, did you want to add to that, or are you okay?
Yeah, I would have just said like resources. So that could be that.
It's resources being put to use, right? It's not just like coal, and it's not, it's not just soil. It's the technology that is being used to then produce things. Okay. Marx is writing this during the Industrial Revolution, right? The Communist Manifesto was written in the 1850s. It's actually a short book, if you're interested, and it's well written. And yes, and he's talking about the proletariat rising up against the bourgeoisie, and the time is right for that. Let's press a little bit further than that. Why is the proletariat pushing back on the bourgeoisie? Why are they going to rip their bellies open? Why are they done with the bourgeoisie? Sorry to get graphic, but I can't help it. I keep thinking of pitchforks and big bourgeois bellies. Why are the proletariat, why are they pushed to this extreme? Jesse.
I would assume it's because of the hoarding of wealth and the carelessness of regulations and safety, and all the landowners demanding rent from farmers who aren't even getting paid enough for what they produce and things like that.
Thank you. Rachel.
Maybe also because the bourgeoisie has continually kept the proletariat against each other, and has continually told them that they are all different and that they shouldn't question the way that things are.
Awesome. Chloe.
Also, specifically in the context of the Industrial Revolution, rapid development of technology for some means that human work will be even cheaper and more efficient, which is, I think, the kind of capitalist viewpoint. And I think the more Marxist viewpoint is that technological development should make human life easier and make human work easier. And so I think
Awesome. You anticipated my next question, Chloe. Industrialization has to do with technological advancement. And technological advances had greatly changed the nature of labor in the 1800s. They still are today in many ways. And that is also driving what he is seeing here, okay? So as Chloe indicates, you know, as technology advances, what do technological advances do to salaries? What do they do to wages? I mean, of the workers. Yeah, Jess, Sean.
Bring them down.
They do. Rachel?
The more that technology improves, the more that they're like, oh, okay, so we can save on costs by eliminating workers from our
There you
field.
go.
That way we can keep getting more money because they don't care about the worker.
That's right. So it has incredible pressure, downward pressure on wages, technological advances, to the extent that it can make them redundant, as they say in England, right? They can put them out of work. And what Marx is talking about is he's saying in the Communist Manifesto, he's saying, look what, you take the technological advances, incessant, right, changes in technology. Nobody stands around and says, whoa, we should let up on the gas, right? No, we'll deal with this shortly when we talk about automation. Okay. Oh, hey, Jesse, did you want to say something else?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it might be redundant at this point, but that the technological advancements in factories specifically result in people not being paid from like how much they produce anymore, because it's not them producing it, it's the machine.
Mm-hmm.
So much more of something can be made for exactly or in even less time. So yeah, that is another way that it results in lower wages, because it's not about how much the human is making, it's the machine.
Great. Right. Thank you. Yeah. So you have on one hand these technological advances that are really pressuring labor, and then you have the inexorable push for profit on the side of the bourgeoisie. And Marx says what you're getting is an inevitable collision here, right? I'll be very blunt. He was saying to the bourgeoisie, listen, I mean, he wasn't really addressing to them, but he was saying, listen, the situation's like this. The bourgeoisie is driven by profits and technology, and they are pushing the proletariat's wages lower and out of work to such a state that they are in desperation. And you cannot have a society where the mass of people are in desperation, poverty, and hunger, and there are a few opulent souls living around them. You cannot have this. Therefore, you will have revolution. So the Communist Manifesto was not a call for revolution. It was a prediction. Revolution is coming, and it is inevitable. And by the way, he says it's cyclical. Every time you have these, so social changes, such as we see this impending social change where the proletariat would take over, is driven by what Marx says are material causes. And the material cause in this case is just advances in the means of production. It's just technology, okay? Let me put it a different way. Well, I mean, that's basically what I want. Let me just tie this in now to Max Weber. This is his proposition, which Weber is going to be responding to, right? You'll notice that the title is indicative. It's the spirit of capitalism, all right? He is looking at the spirit. Marx is talking about matter. He's talking about materialistic determinants. History can be no other way. That's what Marx's point is. This is the way that it's going to happen, and this is unavoidable. And in the next 150 years, when the means of production change again, you will again have a different revolution, right? The precursor revolution he talks about to the Industrial Revolution, he talks about the feudal revolution, right? The means of production at that point determine social relations. And when this revolution happens again, thanks to technological advancement, then you'll have different social relations and so forth. So Marx sees, these changes as born in means of production, and they are inevitable. Okay, so there we have it. That's all I need to say to set this up for Weber at this point. Let's see here. Air has a comment. Yes, cool.
Oh,
Okay.
that was from a while ago. Sorry.
Hey, no worries. I mean to tell you guys, I can't be guaranteed. I can't be counted on to follow the chat. So if I miss anything, let me know. Okay. That's all I want to say about Marx for now. Does anybody have any questions? The other thing you should probably know about Marx is that he understood capitalism extremely well. I think he understood it better than most economists. And the one thing that he recognized is, well, before I dive in, let's see what Jesse has to say.
I just actually have a question. Obviously in the reading, Weber was talking about more or less one of the causes or the roots of like the spirit of capitalism, this mindset that produces these capitalist societies. So would you say Marx, his view was that like technology or technological advancements were the root of that kind of mindset?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Technology gave us the Industrial Revolution, where you saw the rise of the capitalists. Thank you, Jesse. Very important that you helped me make this point. Technological advances are what gave us capitalism, but capitalism, as I'm about to point out in a second from now, capitalism destroys itself, according to Marx. So I will riff on that in 1 second, but thank you, Jesse. That's a very important way to put it. So essentially what we have here is that Marx and Weber are going to have competing accounts of the origin of capitalism. That's the perfect way to put it, Jesse. The Industrial Revolution, according to Marx, which was distinguished by capitalists and proletariats, the Industrial Revolution is what gave us capitalism. But capitalism cannot last, according to him, for a very simple reason. According to Adam Smith, who wrote one of the greatest books laying out the capitalist system, Adam Smith says competition. Competition is the main virtue of a capitalist market. Competition, the competition between corporations. Why is competition between corporations so important, do you think? Why is it good? Yes, Sean.
Well, if that guy's selling for $5 and I can afford to sell for $4, then people are going to buy from me. And so theoretically, competition keeps wages low or keeps prices low, potentially keeps wages at a reasonable level as people compete for labor, and drives innovation as people compete for a more efficient or better product to sell.
Rockin'. Jesse.
I just never lowered my hand from the previous one.
Right. Ella, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, like that competition can also keep wages at like a fairly reasonable level because someone isn't going to want to work for the same job for less money.
Awesome. Rachel.
In the market sense, it perpetuates the idea of choice, that there is variety, even though it's all actually the same product or the same same service.
Awesome. Christopher.
Yeah, so I was just kind of like was thinking about an example that came to mind. You can think of like our healthcare system and like how they want like an even healthcare, but then that eliminates all the competition to keep prices down also, which I
Good.
think is kind of interesting too to relate.
Yeah, competition is vital to a healthy market. And it has obvious benefits that you guys pointed out. Chris, did you say everything you wanted to say, Chris?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. As you guys have pointed out, competition is good for us consumers, right? When I have multiple people out there selling certain goods, I can shop around and buy the best deal. Competition between employers is also good for employees, right? If I live in town and Walmart in a small town in Iowa and Walmart's the only employer, I'm kind of screwed, right? Then I'm subject to that. But if I could shop around like, well, hey, it's Costco and Target will treat me better, then you can go work for them. Competition is so important. There is a big problem. I'm going to put it in the chat. Which companies compete best? Do you know what I mean? Chloe?
Companies compete best when they are extremely large and have a lot of expendable money to spend on a lot of different ways, including marketing, legal, things like that. To kind
And
of
how do they sometimes treat other companies when they're really, really, really big?
terribly.
Okay. What do they do?
They can be very aggressive in terms of bargaining or in terms of just like in general, if you have the expenditure, you can kind of push people around so that you are making your best way.
Nice.
Without about other ways.
Jesse?
Larger companies compete better because they can just simply swallow their competition. Instead of having to do better or anything, they can just buy them out
Awesome.
or ruin them. Yeah.
Air?
Well, I was thinking of like larger companies in contemporary context where like they end up like not even competing at all and just like end up dividing parts of like the population to just like market to like like internet companies and whatnot. Like there's no competition in that when your entire area just ends up becoming like one single thing.
Gotcha. Chris, did you want to say something again? No?
Oh, no, I just forgot to put my hand
Don't worry about
down.
it. Right. I was reading this recently. Think about how these we're going to talk a lot about the tech firms in this class because they're the big firms these days. 100 years ago in Weber's time, he would have been talking about Standard Oil, which ends up being broken up, and you get Exxon and Mobil and who else? Citgo, all these other firms. What we're talking about here, folks, we're talking about monopoly. This is what Marx understood. He said, okay, competition is the virtue of a capitalist marketplace. I get you. That's awesome. Guess what? The companies that compete best, they become big. And the bigger they get, they devour the competition until they are monopoly. And who are monopolies good for? No one, well, except for the monopoly owner, but they're not until we slit that guy's belly, right? Am I right? Anyway, who's with me? Anyway, but right, fuck it, yeah, revolution. Okay, but I'm not revolutionary. I'm in a button down, Christ. What was I thinking? I got sidetracked by fantasies of revolution. Somebody help me.
Monopolies are good for no one but the monopoly owner.
Jesse, awesome. Well, they're terrible for consumers, right? They can sell you crap products for $85 an ounce, right? And they're terrible for workers, obviously. And you see this. Walmart, which has been, by the way, another word for a monopoly, y'all, is a trust. Okay? So what comes about in the end of the 19th century, early 20th century in America, we get something called antitrust legislation. And basically, this is legislation. These are laws that give our federal government the force and power to forcibly break up these companies, which is what they did with Standard Oil. They broke it up into many smaller companies. In my lifetime, and your parents will know this, in the 1980s, there was one phone company. It was called Bell. And the company said, and the government broke it up. They called them the Baby Bells. You had AT&T and I can't think of any others. MCI, I don't know. Anyway, but Marx was very clever. He understood this was an inherent problem. And this is where this will be a big debate going forward, right? There are people of the laissez-faire persuasion who argue that we should, the people who argue government should not get involved, they will say things like, listen, monopolies can resolve themselves organically without government intervention. Or as we'll see with Milton Friedman next week, if you would deal with monopolies, you got to invite government intervention, but that solution is worse than the cure. That's Friedman's position, and we'll see why. But essentially, Marx's point is, the idea of a self-regulating market is a fantasy, because capitalism will eat itself. Well, he died before he saw antitrust legislation. He didn't see how capitalist societies could reinvent themselves, if you will, and reform themselves, and thereby, live another 150 years. But any case, there. I just want to make that point for you. It's a very important point to understand about Marx going forward. Any other questions about Marx at this point? All right. Well, let's dive into the Weber book. First of all, let's see what you all thought about this. How'd you all find this reading? Anybody want to chime in? General impressions? Go for it. Sean.
I'm not sure if this is like an impression, but I know this was translated, and it seemed like some of the sentences had some strange grammatical structure. Is that just because I'm not used to reading his work, or is there like some weird stuff going on with the
Good question. I don't know. It's German, first of all. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a comment on that. I will say this. One thing that was strange about the edition I got for you guys that I posted on Canvas, it is incredibly different from the book that I was using, which you don't usually see translations vary quite so much. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. But maybe that leads into the question. Was this easy, difficult to understand? How about we start there?
I think there were parts that were easy, but other parts, when he maybe got into like a rhythm explaining something, he kind of got a bit redundant in some areas and kept going on the same points, and it got a bit jargony and historical.
Gotcha. Teresa.
I think that I had an easier time as I moved forward in the text, because I think in the beginning he was introducing a lot of different points and a lot of different concepts. And as I went on, I kind of saw how he was like kind of puzzle piecing things together and creating the patterns. However, there were certain tangents he went on where, because kind of like what Sean said, he was really driving home certain points. When he would go on a tangent, I felt like kind of had trouble digesting that part. Like when he would talk about Judaism or something, and like how that compared to Protestant things, I think I got a bit more confused, even though I really wanted to understand what he was talking about. I I think it was just kind of like a whiplash thing for me. But yeah.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that it's a really, really big book, or maybe that's a different one that's like 700 pages. But this, I felt like between the gaps of like the first two readings and then when it starts up again at like 103 or something, I felt like there was a lot of information in that period that he was referencing, and it probably continues on after that for a while. So I felt like if I had the time, I totally would have wanted to read the whole thing, because there was only like a snapshot of certain ideas. Like he would mention a new person to me and then be like, as noted above. And then I'd be like, where was the above? I don't know. So yeah, but I agree with Teresa that the more I went on reading it, the more I understood. Also because of the fact that he writes like big word after big word after big word. It took a second, honestly, for my mind to like adjust to reading like that and like taking in each word on its own and then putting all the meanings together. And so I got better with it the more I went.
Awesome. Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah, I'm pretty much just agreeing. I think it takes a little bit to get into the rhythm of reading it, but once you start reading it, you kind of start to put everything together. And I would agree with the whole like going off on a little bit of a tangent. And I think you could tell which parts he was really connecting with himself, just based on, you know, how much he went on about certain things. And I would find myself like rewinding and going back to the start of some paragraphs and saying, okay, I don't really know how we got there. Like, where did he start? But I think eventually you kind of get the hang of it and it all started to piece together.
Awesome. Thank you. Ella.
This is like my first time reading, I guess, a more like philosophical or like historical economic text, because I took like microeconomics in high school, but that was like primarily like math and like hypothetical situations.
Yeah.
So it was really strange, I guess, to be like reading about like people in such a way that was so like dehumanized, I guess, and like based on like the math that I had learned. I don't know, like slightly troubling, but
okay. Very good. Jesse, did you want to say something else? No?
Nope, sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
No worries. Well, why don't we start at the very beginning? And let's talk about Benjamin Franklin. We all know Ben Franklin, right? With his glasses and his bald head and his publishing, whatever, and his taste for beer and women, I'm told. How'd that opening, what'd you think of that opening speech? Anybody surprised? Postmaster General, thank you. What stood out to you in that opening speech by Ben Franklin?
He was kind of like saying how he could, or how people could manipulate capitalism to be like efficient for them. So like specific strategies to build credit and things like that.
Awesome. Jesse. Jesse Laudadio. I saw your hand first.
I thought it was really interesting the way he kind of admitted to not really, he said basically that like it's not required to be honest, or any of the other virtues. Like it's not actually required. If you can kind of pretend and make it seem like you are, that gets you to just the same end. And I think that's pretty evident in the way a lot of people today run their businesses, is just the illusion of caring and the illusion of honesty. Yeah.
Very nice. Jesse Foster.
I mean, that's pretty much what I was going to touch on, but I guess just as a whole, I found it pretty interesting how much he tied like all of this attitude and mindset towards credit and capitalism as like virtuous. Like,
thank you. Tying capitalism and virtue together. Awesome. Chloe?
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar. Like I think the beginning of the reading came much more relevant to me once I got to the end, specifically the part where they were talking about how the spirit of capitalism kind of came from secularizing ideas of like virtue in terms of managing your wealth and managing your work. And I found it really interesting that, like, I mean, I assume Ben Franklin was a religious man just from the time he was from, but it was really interesting that, like, it was personal traits as virtue relating to like a market and a finance, rather than, like, you know, your faith.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chloe. Let's do something to make this easier, I think, for everybody. Let's just sum up really what his argument is. You can sum up his claim in one sentence. And you know what? The title is just about it. It's just like missing like one word. So the title is The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Can somebody transform that title into his claim?
Drove.
What?
Insert drove. Drove the spirit of capitalism.
Good. Jesse Laudadio.
I was just gonna say created.
Right. Jesse Foster, you going to add to that?
I was going to say influenced.
Good. The Protestant. So you want to know where the spirit of capitalism comes from? Look to Protestant ethics. That's the law. That's his big claim. I guess where he's being a sociologist is the way that he's drawing these. He's really characterizing. What does he do? He's doing caricatures of these Protestant sects. The second part of your reading is where he does that, right? And the main ones he fingers are Lutheranism and Calvinism more broadly. From Calvinism, by the way, everybody, we get the Puritans. They're a brand of Calvinists, and the Presbyterians. That's also a brand of, also an outgrowth. Okay. And then the Quakers. And here's another question. Geographically, where is this link between Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism? Geographically, where is it most evident? Which country does he see it in? Go ahead, Sean.
The U.S.
USA. Right. And he is not an American scholar. Don't forget, he's a German scholar. Reading Ben Franklin. Kind of weird. His great revelation is that the United States is this Petri dish where you throw all these Protestant ethics together, shake them up, and look what you get. Blam. Right? You had the Puritans in New England. You had the Quakers in Pennsylvania, right? Presbyterians kind of throughout, right? So his point is, and then a giant influx of Lutheranism with the German immigrants. There was actually a serious discussion after the American Revolution whether German should not be the second language of the early American nation, because there were so many German speakers in Pennsylvania, for example. So you have major representations of these Protestant ethics and of these sects that he thinks give rise to capitalism. Okay, what's missing? Catholicism. He reveals repeatedly Catholics make shitty capitalists. He does not mention Jews or Muslims. Well, he mentions Jews. Muslims don't get involved. There are no Buddhists, Hindus. His claim is that it is the Reformation and the Protestant spirit that gives rise to capitalism as we know it. Okay. Now, there are several caveats, right? He will tell us, for example, that the form of a capitalist market is quite old. You have these capitalist markets that predate the 18th century, but they were not driven, but you don't see people, you don't see merchants driven by this urge to compete and crush the competition, right? You don't see that. That's the switch that happens. And Ben Franklin is early evidence of this of this ethic, of this specific ethic. Okay? Let me pause there for a second, see if anybody has any questions. No? All right. Well, in my translation, he talks about traditionalism, and what he means is basically traditional Christian view of the economy, but let's talk about the Christian view of work. And I think maybe I can't remember, maybe I asked about this in the reading responses. What does he say how was work or how was labor viewed prior to the Protestant Reformation? How much should you work, basically, Jesse?
So basically you just work however much you need to in order to be able to afford the like necessary accommodations of life, as well as like some enjoyment. And so like when they talked about people were trying to figure out how to get people to work more, and so they tried increasing the wages and then decreasing the wages, and they found pretty much the same result, that people will simply just work as much as they need to in order to afford the things that they've always known they needed.
Right. Good. Let me put it this way. How were workaholics viewed? Jesse Foster?
I mean, it was viewed as like indulgent and therefore sinful.
Thank you. Sinners. Workaholics are sinners, right? That's fucking un-American right there. To say the workaholics are sinners, that's un-American. We revere workaholics, okay? Just keep that in mind. The pre-modern view was, you're going to work on Saturday? Are you joking? I have a subscription to the New York Times, and one of the things that I find kind of funny in the New York Times is that once in a while they interview a celebrity and or someone famous in Manhattan who lives in Manhattan, and they're like, what do you do with your Sundays? Right? What do you do with your Sundays? And like the person's like, well, I get up at 8, have my coffee, chill with my kids, walk the dog in Central Park. I have brunch here. Brunch is de rigueur. If you live in Manhattan, you got to do brunch. Mind you, not a single one of them go to church because they're all godless atheists. And then, I will do yoga and I will exercise and blah. And I've often wondered about this thing, and I'm like, Sundays? Why not Saturdays? Right? And obviously the reason is because they're working on Saturdays. If you live in Manhattan, you work 6 days a week. And how many hours in a day do you work? Oh, what do you think? 15? I have friends who they did law school, and then they went business school, and they went up to do Wall Street or start with the law firms in Manhattan. They were regularly working 18-hour days early on. You don't have a life. So we know workaholics very well in this country. I'd be curious to hear from some of the international students about whether this sounds familiar. But I think this sounds very familiar to Americans. I think this sounds very familiar to Micah students, right? You guys work really hard. Let me turn that into a question. Do you agree? A couple thumbs up. Oh yeah, Jesse Foster.
I mean, really quick, it's funny, I was like up late last night reading this, really pushing myself and like taking notes, and I was tired, so I had to read paragraphs over and over, and it was like, taking hours. And then I was like, why am I doing this? This is telling me basically that I shouldn't be doing this.
No, ignore that thought. You have to do it. Jesse Lodati, and some might even look down on students who don't work all the time. Oh, yes? That's very interesting.
I've just heard people comparing how much work they put into a project to other students and saying like, I did all this work, like who are they to come in here with having only done this much? It's like there's a lot of comparison.
I know you guys well. I've taught here for 15 years, and I've taught at other colleges, by the way. Okay. I know how you all stack up. Other kids do not work as hard as you do. The liberal art kids, they're stoned right now. They're doing their, like, you guys are, you work. That was one of the things that struck me when I got to Micah is art students work hard. I think one of the reasons is, you know, in your high school, you were all the best, and now you're surrounded by the best, and this drives you. But there's also more. Like, this is a cultural thing. It's called the grind. And this is just the beginning, right? And I see you sleepwalking into class and you know, come finals. Olivia.
Oh, sorry. I just a little side note. I think there's just like this weird competition going on as to who can get like less sleep every night.
Yes.
I don't like kids come into class and they're like, I got 4 hours, and the next kid's like, oh, I got 2, and I'm still here. And it's just like,
Right.
why?
Very nice. Chloe.
I think also something I've noticed, I mean, I've only been to Micah, but I think it's like an art school specific thing, and especially a fine art thing. There's kind of an idea of like, so many of you won't make it. So if you are not working 25/8 to be an outstanding and very prolific artist at 20, you won't make it ever at any point in your life. I've heard people literally say that to their classes.
Yeah.
So it's I think that's like it's encouraged from all spaces, from not even just professors, but I think like the quote unquote art market in general.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Good. Okay. So you all know what I'm talking about. You already understand a good part of what Weber is talking about. I know you might not have thought of yourselves as capitalists, although Micah is urging you to, because, you know, you have to be entrepreneurs now, apparently. But that work ethic, like, this is something. And by the way, let me pause here for a second. Let me just fish around. We have some international students out there. I'm looking at you guys. What do you all have to say about the work ethic in the U.S.? How does that maybe does anything stand out to you? International crowd. Do we work differently? Do we view work differently? No.
I think it's quite the same how we view work. Like, I'm from China, and I think the working environment in China is also very heavy. Yeah, and people like praise the people who work more. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I've heard that in China they have famously long work weeks as well. I guess I don't have any European international students here. You guys know what the work week is in France? You do, Chloe? Or are you saying 4 hours?
I thought it was, I've seen that they have like a lot of schools, French schools even, have like Wednesdays off, like just consistently for breaks in the middle of the week, which is, I can't even fathom.
By law, the work week in France is 35 hours. But there's a big cult, it's a cultural view that's quite different. We'll talk about this as we go ahead in this class, because I'm going to be asking you questions like, what does it mean to work less and to have more free time? And what are you going to do with all that time, right? The French, they don't mind. They're sitting in cafes, smoking Gauloise. They're cool. Americans, I don't know. When we have time, what do? We work. right? Arya.
Yeah, so I'm from India, and there are many hours of the day that people work as well, but they get like a lot of breaks in the middle throughout the day.
Yeah.
And it's much more slower paced compared to the US, where every single day is so fast paced that even lunch breaks, a lot of people don't take like a full lunch break. So that was like an interesting contrast.
Or they work through lunch.
Hmm.
Air.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if I 100% agree with you with about like if we have work off, what do we do? I don't think we like work. I think we're like, well, I guess we do work, but
I never said we liked work. That was not the issue. I'm just saying work.
yeah. I'm just gonna put it out there, but like, because of COVID and everything, think about like all the progress towards like social change and things that I guess that is kind of considered work, but work of a different manner. Like protesting and whatnot, how open we became to like Black Lives Matter and things, how much that came into conscience when we all had this free time, you know? I guess it's like a different type of work. Non-monetary.
I used to argue that, you know, our workaholic culture undermines politics because we don't have time for the kind of stuff you're talking about. So that would be a welcome change for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind. I contradicted myself. Okay.
Not contradict yourself. No, you made a very interesting point. I would push back and say, I think we had this conversation last week, how what's funny about COVID is, you know, we were talking about all the social changes and work changes, and people have more time. And what do we do with that time? And, you know, the unique stresses of the COVID life is that, you know, many of you are in your bedrooms right now, like doing this class. And so the dividing line between work and leisure is like they bleed together. And so I've just noticed that COVID has been uniquely stressful for people. You know, I don't know that on the whole that it made us work less, frankly. But you're totally right, Air, that was very remarkable that we saw those awesome protests over the summer. I think that's very interesting. Jesse Laudadio?
Yeah, I just wanted to actually bolster your claim about what we do when we don't, when we're not at work, we work more, or when we don't have to, by an example of when I worked at this one photo printing company for a couple months towards the end of 2020. People actually would choose all of the time. There was almost no time where any of the older employees, like anybody past 30, if they were given the option to stay late or come in early, they would always take it. People were working so much, and it was all by choice. And people, like, I saw this one Facebook post about this woman praising another employee for working all these hours when she didn't have to. And yeah, it's true. People, not necessarily young people like us, but people who are at least 30 and on, they will almost always, as I've seen, take overtime and just keep working, because it's been so long in their life that of them working all the time that they kind of don't really have any hobbies to go home and do. Like, they don't have the like, when they think like, what do I do without work, they almost don't have an answer for themselves because their whole life has become work.
Good. I'm going to hand it off to Chloe in a second, but I want to put something in the chat here. There's a very important book written by a sociologist, again, named, I forget his first name, Putnam is his last name, at Harvard. It's called Bowling Alone, where he talks about the demise of these civic groups. You know, if any of you guys were raised on Fred Flintstone, there's, you know, maybe that's too far back, but Fred Flintstone, he had this club that he belonged to called the Moose Club, and they would wear their moose hats. And it was kind of a parody of what they used to do in America in the 1950s. You had the Elks Lodge, Kiwanis, Rotary, veterans that people would go to during the week, or they would go bowling, right? They would do these other activities. Nowadays, we don't do that stuff at night. We collapse in front of the TV. By the way, another big change from the 1980s, 70s, 80s, which is on hiatus during COVID, but that is the commute, right? I mean, it is amazing. You should do the math. about how much of people's lives they spend in their fucking cars, just driving. My neighbor here, he used to work in Rockville, and that was an hour and a half each way. What? That's not lifetime you can get back, you know? And people, I have family in New York, and they will go 2 hours each way. So, you know, people don't have time for this kind of stuff. Work dominates everything. Chloe.
Well, I was also thinking kind of regarding what Jesse said about hobbies, like some people don't have hobbies, but then I think also we are in a society where if you do have one, it's kind of expected in some way that you monetize it. Like my mother, who works a full-time job in shipping logistics, like anytime, like every 6 months, she'll buy a bunch of stuff for a new hobby and she'll say, I could make so much money doing this thing. And then because she's so tired from her actual salary job, she obviously doesn't. Like
Yeah.
it's a culture where like your main job is obviously necessary, but you're encouraged to have so many like side hustles for more money.
Side hustles. Right. Good. Daniel.
Well, I just think it's interesting that there's a lot of talk about work as a negative thing in the sense that it's all that you're doing, and that people who choose to work don't have hobbies, and that like just everything that's being said for me personally seems kind of contradictory to how I've been trying to live my life. You know, as someone in the product design department, COVID kind of ruined an essential part of our process to entering the workforce, because it's not really preferential or good to do freelance work at this age. You kind of need experience working at a big capitalist company to like get knowledge as a designer. And so having internships canceled in the summer and having a lack of access to the tools we need for a thesis in the studio has led to us to have increased work, because now to make up for that, we're having guest people and members on our thesis and building an advisory board. We have to consult with like 5 people bi-weekly all the time and build a portfolio on the side that's like not integrated into our work right now, even though we're doing our best work now. And so everything is just exponentially increasing in order for us to just have any relevancy. But I would still say on the flip side to that, that I'm putting in all of this work because it's not necessarily work to me. It's what I want to do and contribute with my life. And that even in doing that, I still have a lot of hobbies. And so like, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of people may gravitate towards this way of living, not just because it's forceful and ingrained, but perhaps because they see meaning in it, even if it's not in the religious sense that was being discussed in the text.
Excellent. I think those are great points. Christopher.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna also agree with Daniel, that like I don't know, I even like with artists, it's something that's not really encouraged all the time by people, to just give up your careers and be an artist. And I feel like doing art is something, if you're passionate about, is not necessarily something you might see as work. And I see like I do photography, so like of course there's like work photography, but I also find myself with having it as a hobby as well, and being able to take the things you like and integrate it as, so it doesn't mainly feel like a drag, I guess.
Good. Thank you. Rachel.
I think that's something that's important to
Oh,
acknowledge.
can you put your volume up a little bit, Rachel?
I didn't know it was down. Is it like down? Can you?
No, just you're a little bit harder to hear.
I'll just get closer. I think the thing to acknowledge about what was just said is that in a way is a point of privilege in time and history completely, because we live in a very specific time where entertainment and the arts can be recognized as a work form. because it just was not valued at all whatsoever for a real long time, because those things just did not support people surviving in certain ways. And that it will eventually turn into work. Even if it is something that you love and you're passionate about, with time, anything that you have that you are doing to create a profit, it is going to feel like work, because it ends up being the only thing that is keeping you alive in a capitalist society, is the money that you get from said career choice.
Excellent. Daniel, did you want to say something else?
Yes, actually, I just want to say that that's both a very good point, but also I think somewhat misleading, in the sense that, you know, we recognize what we're doing as a creative entertainment endeavor. I don't personally. I don't. Product design is not. I would not associate it with that. But I recognize what you're saying. But I would also go and say that there are a lot of industries and professions, such as blacksmithing and cobbling shoes and sewing your own garments, et cetera, that have gone away, that kind of embody a similar spirit to what we're doing. It may not have like the same motives or narratives behind it, but the craft and the passion that's put into it and the kind of relationships you build learning it, it's still very much similar. And so I think it's just like, I think something to add on to your point about privilege, I think it's the privilege of having a skill or a calling, as the Protestants would like to say, versus working out of necessity to survive in something that you don't care about. And in that sense, there's a strong divide that kind of keeps people stuck and unhappy on one side and helps people prosper more on the other side in a way that isn't always fair.
Awesome. Jesse.
Yeah, I just wanted to basically address the in the first thing that Daniel said, that I wouldn't say that just because it doesn't feel like work, that it's not still engaging in that mindset of like continuous work, because I think most of, like, for artists, I'd say there might be other professions where this also is, what's the word I'm thinking of, that it also applies to. But for artists, like, a lot of times, yeah, what we do doesn't necessarily feel like work because we want to be doing it. But in this reading, I think it's pointed out that people can enjoy or not enjoy the job they're doing. They just accept it either way. And they do it because it is their calling. And we use different words today, like passion, or mainly passion, I'd say. But like, I do it because it's my passion, not because I have to. But I think that in itself is in line with what Max Weber is saying, that that they do it because they want to, for whatever reason.
Awesome. Chloe, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I think also relating it both to the reading and what Daniel said, the part about garment making was really interesting to me, because I loved the little snippet included in the reading about cottage industry, textile workers. I was reading that and I was like, what a life. And then comparing that, especially with garment workers today, garment workers are a classically underprotected, underserved, underpaid, and overworked class. And so I think it's really interesting, especially within a craft to industry sphere, to think of the way that labor, specifically in very labor intensive fields, is exploited.
Yeah.
I think, again, like, I mean, you could have, there's so many people who have a passion for sewing in like their day to day. It's almost certain that those people are not garment workers, you know, like if you are garment working, I think it diminishes your joy a little bit in that passion. And I think that is also something that ties into
a lot
work of craft and everything. Yeah.
Daniel? Your hand's up. No?
Wait,
worries.
do you have to put it down?
I guess so.
There's like an elaborate 3-step process to me putting this down. So I'm
Daniel,
gonna
you have
lower
to
it 'cause you're
go.
gonna keep calling out.
Work. Figure it out. Anyway, here, I'm putting something in the chat. And this is a point he makes. In the United States, work is a virtue. Or to put it otherwise, work is a sign of virtuous people. Or I might put it this way: virtuous, upstanding folk, what do? They work. Right? You see this all the time. This is something the Europeans don't get. So my family in Belgium, you get the, healthcare. It's a right. So when we had this debate over in this country about Obamacare, and we're like, and the Republicans said, "Oh, no. If you want healthcare, you got to work." And my European family was like, why? What? You see this in the Republicans all the time. They are just petrified that people aren't working. Oh, you want welfare? Oh, you better work. You want this? You better work. You got to work all the time. Notice what the social welfare state in Europe does. It takes away, it limits or alleviates the burden on you, right? I like the term that Chloe used, side hustle. Why do we have side hustles? Well, we have to hustle in general in this country, right? Healthcare is not guaranteed. College is going to be 70 grand pretty soon, if it isn't already. In this country, so in Europe, in so many of the countries in Europe, your taxes are what? 60%, like in Sweden. What do you get for your money? You get education guaranteed through college. You get healthcare. In the United States, the burden is flipped, right? Your taxes are lower, but guess what? You got to foot the bill for your healthcare, and you got to foot the bill for your college. That puts a lot more pressure on us. Okay, so you got to hustle. That's what you're going to have to do in this country. And it is a sign of virtue that you work and you work hard. Okay, now, the peculiarity of the Protestant ethic is this. You might have noticed. Well, I could put the question to you this way. It's just a rhetorical question. I'm not going to open this up for discussion at this point because it could go anywhere, but what are people working for, right? What are they working for? Well, in America, we have these things called shopping malls. There is a lot on offer, right? But what is strange about the Puritans, how did the Puritans feel about consumerism? How did the Puritans feel about theater? Did you catch that? Or sports? They fucking hated life. And what did they do? They worked. So that's why Weber says over and over, like, this is highly irrational, right? It's highly irrational. So going back to tradition, by the way, if everybody's cool with this, I'm going to go till 5:45. Does that work? Okay. So going back to this issue of traditionalism, he says in the traditional view, people, you made enough so you could live. And then he says, so anybody who wanted to, get more production out of workers was kind of in a bind. Because when you are faced with people who are just looking to earn enough to live, what happens when you raise their wages to induce more work? What do?
They work less.
They work less. Why?
Because they don't need extra money.
Because they're like, oh, you're going to pay me double? Then fuck it, I'm working half the hours. And the capitalist is on the sideline going like, no. So what do? They're like, okay. He says they try the opposite approach. Let's keep you poor. Let's pay you less. And that, he argues, had a better approach, right? Because people are like, oh, geez, now I have to work double to actually get what I want. But he says the problem is you're not necessarily going to get the right quality of work. How do you get the right quality of work? Well, this is where he talks about these pietists. I'm going to put this in the chat. Pietists. Pietists are a unique sect of Protestant Christianity that you find in Germany, in Northeast Germany. Immanuel Kant was a pietist. And he talks about these I think these were female workers who, you know, and in what he's talking about in the 1800s, he's talking about some of the first people leaving the farms to go into the cities. And sometimes, you know, they would go out and they would find these, in some cases, depending on the industry, they would be women. And he notices that he observes that these pietist women, they worked really well. And so in order to get the right quality of work, he says there had to be he noticed that there was a correlation with a specific religious education. And the religion, and the point is that these people, they see work as an end in itself, right? Because you got a big problem. There's a big problem with the capitalist model, right? Here's the problem. You're working for the man, right? You're working for the man. Do you give a shit about the man's stuff? No. Fuck the man, right? I don't give, you know, like, I don't care. Oh, that's not going to work. We need people who care. We need people who care immensely and will put in their best work. Oh, but not for the money. Right? You feel me? Perfect. Protestant ethic, right? This makes the ideal workers. They will work like the Dickens. Perfection. Jeremiah, why are you working so hard on that garment? It is my calling. This is my calling, right? I'm trying to think of some old-timey American Protestant name. Maybe Jehoshaphat and Jeremiah are arguing, you know, why it is my calling. God put me on earth and I will not let God down. But Jeremiah, are you working for the bling? Oh, no, I'm not working for the bling. I am a Christian. Oh no, right? But there's going to be a lot of money made for someone, right? Who's going to get that money? Not Jeremiah, right? He disavows the money. Your good Puritan workers are disavowing the money. Who's getting the money?
The man.
The man.
Big capital C.
Okay. So this is something that Marx notices in so the Communist Manifesto is actually rather thin and small, but his major work is called Das Kapital. And it is a great book because it has the best title ever written, Das Kapital. And it's a big book. It's really tough to get through, but one thing he talks about in there is the question of surplus capital, okay? Surplus capital. Capitalism begins with surplus capital. What is surplus capital? Basically, money for investment. It's money that you have liquid that is not invested and that you need to invest it. Where are you going to get this big nut from that's going to get the ball rolling on your industry? Okay. Marx, he says primitive accumulation. And what he means by that is theft, conquest, enslavement. That's where the big nut comes from. The early capitalists, where do they get the money from? They just take, they just steal. The European empires are a case in point. King Leopold of Belgium, when he wanted to start his industry, he just went to the Congo, took it, enslaved people. There are many who argue that American capitalism is built on surplus capital that comes from the same kind of accumulation, right? We took the land from the Native Americans, we enslaved the African Americans. You'll notice that Weber is giving a different account here. He doesn't talk about primitive accumulation. That doesn't come up, right? Where does the surplus capital come from? The surplus capital that then is, of course, invested and reinvested and reinvested, that grows the economy. Where does that surplus capital come from? It comes from hard working, abstemious, Puritan workers. You get it? When your workforce works like the Dickens, they care, but they're not doing it for the money. That's your surplus capital. I'm going to pause there for a second to see if anybody has any questions or comments. Go for it, Jesse.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. When I was reading it and it was kind of discussing this concept that we're talking about now, I understood what Weber was saying to be as like the Protestant ethic is that, you know, you don't really care about the money or like wealth or prestige that can come from having money. And I definitely picked up on one part where he was talking a little bit about surplus capital, not necessarily in those words exactly. So does the surplus capital, like the initial investment, did it come from the workers just basically keeping money but not spending it on, you know?
Well, they're producing wealth, but they're not receiving remuneration for it, basically.
Okay.
That's
Gotcha.
his point. That's his point. And I realize he doesn't, I'm drawing that correlation for you about surplus capital. I know he doesn't talk about that, but it's just a fact, right? When you have these people that will work like the Dickens, but they're not demanding remuneration or much, you're going to have a lot of capital left over. Well, the way capitalism works is that money, not only do you work, by the way, your money works. Okay. This is evident throughout the speech of Ben Franklin, right? Where he talks about, you don't leave money sitting there, you put it to work. Right. There used to be a saying, you hear this occasionally on, like, when you're watching TV and there's ads for investment firms or mutual funds. It says, let your money work for you. Well, that means invest it. You don't take your cash and put it under your bed. That's actually sinful, according to Ben Franklin. Why? Well, just to be clear, if you don't invest your money will actually devalue thanks to something called inflation. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Excuse me. Inflation, right? You guys know what inflation is? The prices of things will invariably go up. So if gas today is, for example, $2.50 a gallon, I'm just throwing it out there, next year it is $2.75 a gallon, and you've kept your money under your mattress because you think you're smart, guess what? Now your money a year later has less purchasing power. Your money is worth less. Therefore, you must invest your money and hope to get some kind of return, maybe 3%, 5%, 7%. If you invested in GameStop last week, you might have made 50%. You have to invest your money just to keep up with inflation. So your money works just as you work. I'm not done. All right, hang on, guys. What's up?
How much longer?
10 minutes.
Okay.
Jesus. Some people are not working. That'd be my teenagers. Okay. Anyway, so your money must work just as you must work. Good. Other questions? Go for it.
Not a question, just an observation that's kind of like just eating away at my brain, which is just, it's so hard for me to grasp onto the fact that there's still so many people that defend the minimum wage not being raised. And it's like, those people are the exact people that the man is in love with, because they're like, you're right. You tell your friends that you guys don't need to catch up with us.
Right.
It's just kind of painful to think about.
And because the minimum wage is so low, you see and because of such a thing as underemployment, so many working people have to piece together, a couple part-time jobs just to get by, right? So one of the arguments for what we call a living wage is that it would enable people to live a life where they're not spending 80 hours a week working. They can actually spend time with their families. Teresa.
Hi, I had a question kind of about the beginning of the reading, I think. There's this part I wrote down about where Weber talks about how people with capitalist spirit or capitalists are indifferent or hostile towards religion. And there's this quote where he says that for capitalists, the thought of pious boredom in paradise has little appeal for their activity-oriented natures. And I guess I'm kind of wondering where kind of that switch happened, where it's like you talk about this kind of Protestant calling, this is God's will, this is the position God put you in. But then I'm wondering where this switch happened, where there's that, and now it's what you were talking about before, where it's like on Sundays no one's going to church. They're like, it's like I'm wondering where this kind of religious.
Thank you. The short of it is, Teresa, I stuck it in the chat there, is what we have inherited now is a secularized Protestant ethic. It has been secularized. And I would argue that he's largely right. If we look, I will defend him. I think there are exceptions. I think if you survey the labor landscape in America, you see that we do work in the way he talks, no matter our religious orientation, or if we have none at all. We have been imbued with this. It's there for whatever reason. I think there is a strong dose of materialism today, which, the early Puritans, they don't understand that. But our consumerism is kind of weird too, right? Because I could he's complaining about endless work. About our consumerism, I could put the question like this: how much is enough? When do you have enough stuff? And we all know the answer to that. Never, right? So just as we are endlessly working, we must be endlessly shopping as well. Okay? Rachel.
There's just, it reminds me so much of your Greek philosophy class, like tying back into that, how it's just like people keep going after stuff because they want more stuff. And then once they get the stuff, they don't have enough stuff. And then they're always miserable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Chloe reminds me about the secularization itself. He was writing in 1900. The Puritans arguably no longer dominated New England by that time. They were already at stiff competition from the Irish, the godless Irish who were there. My mother's Irish, so it's okay. I can say that. She won't mind. The Quakers, they were already butted out of the Pennsylvania Assembly by the early 1800s. So, the dominance of these various sects kind of fades, throughout the 1800s. And I think just the nature of American diversity kind of dilutes, the obvious hegemony of these Protestant sects. And of course, in America, strictly speaking, we have, it is a if it's a Christian nation, it's non-denominational, right? You do have people who argue that America's Christian, but they don't say it's a Lutheran nation. They'd say it's Christian. But then we also have separation of church and state. So, the United States is less secularized than Europe, but we have the secularization has occurred. Okay. But let me hit on this last point here before we break for the day. He points out something really interesting. I'm looking on page 30 in your reading, where he talks about what flips the switch here. He's talking about the spiritual change. And he observes that Today, he observes the religious gains for diligent work hold few attractions. Actually, I think this is exactly the passage that Teresa's pointing to. He talks about the holy tedium of paradise. And so the question is, well, why do people engage in this now? So here's what's funny. Once upon a time, the Puritans were working for the Dickens. Why? Well, I'm reminded of a bumper sticker. As long as you're in my classes, you have to get used to this. I tend to quote bumper stickers. And there was a nice bumper sticker I used to see around and said, Jesus is coming, look busy. Right? Jesus is coming, look busy. And that's kind of a Puritan Max Weber bumper sticker. The point being, why are the Puritans working like Dickens? Well, they're not looking to rest now like those heathen Catholics. No, they are looking to rest in the next life. But as Teresa points out, we live in a secularized nation where that is no longer the game. So this makes it even worse. Why the fuck are you working so hard? What else am I going to do? Right? So he says, you know, why do people toil endlessly now in the secularized nation? To what end? He says none. They don't really toil to any end. He says business has become indispensable to people's lives. Business has become indispensable to people's lives. Daniel made this point earlier, right? It's like it gives meaning. And I really think that's very important. I wrote an article about this in the New York Times last year. Maybe I'll share it with you all, where I was saying the same thing. I think Americans, maybe this is a symptom of our secularization because we don't have religion as much anymore. We find meaning and purpose in work, right? So business has become indispensable to people's lives, work as such. And this is irrational. It makes no sense. It is an irrational way of conducting one's life, he argues. And here's what's really interesting. This is right around page, I guess, 31 or 32. He points out, you know where you see this most? Among the leading entrepreneurs. I have to be careful how I spell this. This is a really tricky word, entrepreneurs. The leading entrepreneurs, the big shots, the ones who really make it, who are consistently successful, they are the ones who actually live abstemiously. Think, you guys have all probably heard of Warren Buffett. And I spelled his name Burfett, which is not fair of me. And that's probably not right either. Fuck it. You know who I mean. You know Warren Buffett? He used to be one of the richest in the world till Bezos blew everybody out of the water. He runs one of the biggest, Berkshire Hathaway. It's one of the biggest investment funds. Anybody know where he lives? Hollywood, Manhattan. Daniel knows.
Oh, sorry.
Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha, fucking Nebraska.
It's a nice place, actually.
I'm sure it is. I'm just saying, like, Daniel, I'm sorry. If you're from Omaha, especially, I'm
from Arizona. I just always thought that there was nothing in Omaha, and I finally visited it. It's just the whole state.
I get you. My only point is, when you think mega millionaires, you don't usually think Omaha. The man lives in a 3-bedroom rancher. The man drives a 1995 Oldsmobile sedan. Sam Walton, founder of Walmart, famously drove an old beat-up Ford truck his entire life. You see this so often. These major entrepreneurs, they're not in it for the money. What are they in it for, right? Well, I think we might have some different answers today that he didn't think about. Jesse?
Well, if they're not in it for the money, then why do they hoard all the wealth that they get from it?
Because they have plans. They're going to do shit with it, right? What did Walton do? He used that capital to invest and expand and kill every small town in America with a Walmart next to it. Was that rational? I don't know. Weber thinks not, at least not personally rational, right? As the saying goes, there's only so much you can't take it with you, right? That's the saying, sorry. You can't take it with you, right? So what are you working like the Diggins for, right? Anyway, I have to stop work because my family has made dinner that they want me to come join them with. So I'm going to let you guys go. Okay. So go ahead. You've earned a break. Go take a break and I'll see you next week, right? Milton Friedman, rock on. Don't forget to read that little article, Social Responsive Business in Addition to Free to Choose. Okay. And let you know if you have any questions or issues. Okay. Bye, everybody. Peace.
Bye.
Later. Thank you.
Thank you.